Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Tuesday, the 13th of August. I'm Stephen Ridgway. FreeBSD project maintainers have addressed a high severity flaw in OpenSSH that could allow remote code execution with elevated privileges. It is related to, and I think derived from, the regression vulnerability in OpenSSH. That one, regression, is CVE 2024 6387, disclosed in July and patched. This is CVE 2024 7589. And it is a case of faulty code that has managed to get into OpenSSH's version on FreeBSD. There is a patch available if you are a FreeBSD user. CVSS score of this, by the way, is 7.4, so reasonably serious, but not absolutely the most critical thing that's out there. There is a workaround, and that is to set the login grace time to 0. The default's 120 seconds. If you set it to 0, and you set that, by the way, in etc sshd underscore config, and then restart sshd, prevents remote code execution, might lead to a denial of service, though, because of potential exhaustion of max startup connections. So if you've got a very busy SSH server, with lots of concurrent connections, lots of people logging in at the same time, you may find that that workaround doesn't or isn't suitable, is not a sustainable workaround for you. If, on the other hand, you are using FreeBSD and occasionally SSH onto it, then you may find that that is an acceptable workaround until you get to the point when you can apply the patch or the upgrade to the OS that deals with this particular vulnerability. So FreeBSD, generally very security aware operating system. Maintainers take security very seriously, so good to see they're on top of this. If they're saying you need to patch or update, you need to patch or update. So several vulnerabilities have been found in Google's QuickShare data transfer utility. So for the uninitiated, which I have to admit included me, Google's QuickShare data transfer utility is a peer-to-peer file sharing utility for Android, Chrome, and Windows devices. It allows you to send files to nearby compatible devices over protocols such as Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi Direct, WebRTC, and NFC. It is, I guess, then a similar approach to sharing files that Apple uses with AirDrop. There is, however, there are vulnerabilities, 10 vulnerabilities that have been discovered in this particular function, which, if chained, could allow remote code execution on targeted Windows devices. So unclear at the moment whether there are patches available. However, if there are, I would strongly recommend that you apply them. Keep an eye out for patches addressing these particular vulnerabilities. Also, if this is not a function that you need, turn it off. at least turn it off. If you don't need it regularly, turn it off, turn it on when you do need it. I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, or the other thing is, of course, you could always, if unless you actually need, say, Bluetooth switched on or whatever it might be, you might want to turn that off as well. However, this does work over Wi-Fi and so on, so there's less. It's a less useful workaround just to disconnect the device from nearby networks. But undoubtedly, there will be a way on Androids and Windows and Chrome and so on to disable this particular service. If you don't need it, turn it off. If you do occasionally use it, turn it on when you need it, turn it off when you're finished. Reduces the threat landscape on your devices. So researchers have demonstrated how attackers can exploit Microsoft Copilot. I know an enormous amount that's been waffled about rather than discussed when it comes to security, AI, and data. I think it's fair to say that we are not fully on top of what AI systems do with the data that they access. Equally, I am not convinced that a good AI is going to be easy to constrain. I think if it's genuinely AI, it will use its own intelligence to work around the guardrails put in place. So we'll see where that goes. Anyway, Copilot is AI-based. Copilot, though, at least in my mind, is one of the more worrying. It's kind of at the worrying end of AI. It sounds so useful, and I've heard, even some very senior people who are, with responsibility for large chunks of technology and/or information security and so on, singing the praises of how Copilot helps them do this, Copilot helps them do that. Yeah. What worries me and what worries the people that wrote this particular article is that Copilot has an enormous amount of access to an enormous amount of data, which is potentially proprietary or sensitive data. You don't understand. I guarantee that none of us properly understand what's happening to this data once it is made visible to Copilot. And in order to investigate this, red teaming program known as LOL Copilot has created a tool that allows ethical hackers to simulate attacks and better understand possible vulnerabilities posed by Copilot. LOL Copilot runs on Microsoft 365 Copilot-enabled tenants with default configurations. And it gives investigators the ability to look into how Copilot can be used for data exfiltration and phishing attacks without leaving traces in system logs. So the issues here are that the majority of, let's say, data exfiltration, although most organizations don't do it, it's relatively simple to log, report, and investigate on outbound connections. Okay, so what is leaving your organization? That's based around the fact that the majority of stuff has to, in one way or another, traverse something to go somewhere else, be that out of your cloud environment or your tenant or whatever, or off your devices or out of your offices or your data centers or whatever it may be. Copilot, on the other hand, though, is ingesting all of this stuff, as it were, under the hood. So the ability to get Copilot to do this work for you, I think, is going to be shown to be increasingly common approach to undertaking a compromise of one sort or another. Copilot plugins now are in another whole area, which is concerning. Again, it's because of the amount of data which is available to Copilot, rather than this being specifically that it's a bad AI. It's not a bad AI. It's just it's given access to things that you wouldn't say, give access to ChatGPT. Give ChatGPT access to that kind of data. I'm not very articulate this morning, am I? So there are concerns that Copilot plugins could install backdoors, or it could allow for data theft, AI-driven social engineering attacks. So if you are using Copilot, have a think about what data Copilot has access to. I think at the moment, the security controls around Copilot, and potentially others, but Copilot, given the way it's used, I think the security controls around it are not adequate. And as we all know, Microsoft has got a lot better with its approach to security over the last 25 years. But historically, functionality has trumped security, and I think this is going to prove to be another case in point. Constraining what Copilot can do would then make it less useful. And it is clearly useful, but unless you understand what's happening to the data in the background, you run the risk of inadvertently offering up all sorts of things to a system that you don't understand, that may or may not be providing you the level of privacy and confidentiality that you would expect. So yeah, have a think about it if you are using it. And finally, for me, oh my goodness, it's going to be the rant of the day. So the UN looks set to approve a cybercrime treaty despite major privacy concerns. So, does anybody else feel like the UN has just become a self-fulfilling work generation scheme for the UN? I don't know. I do. Right. The concept, as always with these sorts of badly thought out pieces of legislation coming especially from organisations over which we as citizens or the general public have absolutely no influence whatsoever, it is badly thought out. The idea is that, though, that it sounds good. It's there to combat cross-border criminal organisations. The difficulty with it is it's been drawn up by a bunch of people that apparently don't really understand what the actual issues are. They just like the sound of it. The big issue with this is that signatories to this particular cybercrime treaty will be required to provide information to other signatory nations without any safeguards or conditions being put in place. Now, you would think, okay, well, surely it's a good thing that we want to share information about cybercriminals, and that's kind of okay if you're working in an environment where the other nations that you deal with play nicely by the rules. But what one nation may say is cybercrime, another nation is equally likely to say is freedom of speech or, for example. It also puts at risk penetration testers, security researchers, investigative journalists. They're all at risk of criminal prosecution because there is no there are no controls in balancing. In fact, Article 24 of the this particular treaty, conditions and safeguards, is actually blank in the current version of the treaty, which is being considered for approval. It allows really broad powers for repressive governments, and sadly, in the UN, there are a lot of repressive governments that are represented. So it doesn't just represent the great and the good; it represents all sorts of people who you would look at and go, "Oh, really?" So the upshot of this is it is looking quite likely that the treaty will will pass in the UN. It also looks unlikely that the US or Europe, don't know about the UK, so I hope not, will actually adopt the convention into national legislation. Basically because it looks like it's absolutely all over the place. So yeah, if you are concerned about these sorts of things, there are other conventions. There isn't actually, as far as I can see, there isn't a need for this particular convention, which is why it makes me feel like this is just, you get to that point, do you feel like especially these non-governmental, unelected, basically unaccountable bodies get to a point where they've actually done what they were set up to do, but rather than admit that and scale themselves back, they just generate other stuff. Well, the UN Convention Against Cybercrime actually massively overlaps with the Council of Europe's Convention on Cybercrime, which is, you might know it as the Budapest Convention, which has been in operation since around 2001. Most European countries, the United States, Japan, Brazil, and so on, are all signatories to that. There are 75 signatories to that. It does contain good safeguards and is a perfectly workable piece of what is now called international law, as if that is actually a thing rather than just being a bunch of treaties and conventions. There's no international law, no matter what a bunch of self-serving lawyers will tell you. I'm off on one today, aren't I? Anyway, so be aware this stuff is bubbling around. If you're interested in information security, if you're interested in or work in any parts of InfoSec that might be affected by this sort of stuff, you should be aware that if this passes and your country signs up to it, if you inadvertently work in penetration testing or whatever it may be, some very nasty countries might ask for you to be extradited. So that is quite enough from me for today. As always, we'll link all these articles to the briefing. Hope you have a good Tuesday, and